同胞用意。島、操縦を古代に渡せ。古代、渡したぞ。うまくやれ。
任しとけ。艦首を大陸に合わせます。ターゲットスコープオープン。電影クロスゲージ明度20。
気泡速度40宇宙の
波気温粒子出力上昇。発射10秒前。対処対先行防御。
5、4、3、2、1、0。発射。
Conservative commentator Matt Walsh famously doesn't like anime, but I'm willing to bet that he at least doesn't hate the Christmas classic Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. The show has been a holiday staple of almost every home with children since its first airing way back in 1964. Should Walsh be a fan of Rudolph, then he does in fact like at least one anime. Those of us who are aficionados of the genre recognize that despite the fact that Rudolph is 3D stop motion and not 2D, it was made in Japan using an easily recognizable visual language employed by the Japanese pop culture. It's said that if you were to hold the actual figures used to shoot the beloved TV special, you would find out that the insides are stuffed with Japanese newspapers. The show's credits say the animation was done by an American company called Rankin Bass, but the animation was outsourced to Japan. Why am I talking about this? Well, it comes to mind because Japan stands out in American history. Japan initiated war with us through its devastating attack on Pearl Harbor, destroying many of our plans and decimating our Pacific Fleet. The Pacific Theater was a long and brutal affair, which combined naval combat along with moments of jungle warfare. Both sides suffered humiliation and huge losses. The United States took the Pacific Islands, but our captured soldiers were also forced to undergo the Bataan Death March, which killed over 5,000 Filipino and 650 American soldiers. Because the Japanese were so good at guerrilla warfare, the U.S. decided it was in our best interest to use a brand new type of weapon, the atomic bomb, in order to force Japan to surrender. We dropped not one, but two. To this day, the United States remains the only nation to have used an atomic weapon, and Japan remains the only nation to have been nuked. The U.S. totally obliterated Japan's military. Then we walked into the country, basically said who would live and who would die. The military leaders were subjected to war crime trials. But the U.S. government decided that for the sake of a smooth transition, the emperor would not face any such indignity. Then we wrote their constitution, determined that Japan would be run democratically, but through a parliamentary process with a prime minister instead of using our own national model with a Congress and president. And then to top it all off, we told them they weren't allowed to have a military of their own and that we would act as their military instead. And that was that. You'd expect the relationship between Japan and the U.S. to be one of smoldering hostility to this very day, but it obviously isn't. In the years and decades following, Japan focused on rebuilding, not just her nation and her infrastructure, but also her culture and economy. Japan had a very special talent. Despite the inscrutability of her language and culture, she had a fun and unique visual style that translated well across all cultures. People from Korea to France to Michigan fell in love with that distinct visual style. Growing up, I used to watch a Japanese space opera called Star Blazers. It featured a giant battleship retrofitted for space travel. In the process of localization, that ship's original name was lost, but in subsequent years, I discovered that the ship's name was the Yamato. the flagship of the Japanese Imperial Navy in World War II, and the largest battleship built in human history. Eventually, I would come to understand the significance of the fact that the Imperial seal at the bow of the ship had been replaced by a giant muzzle of a honking big laser cannon that could fire beams of energy capable of destroying entire planets. While it at first eluded me, I also came to understand the significance that almost all the characters died in a desperate suicide mission, or suicide missions, to save the planet Earth. Spoiler alert. The show synthesized issues post-war Japan grappled with, issues like the enormous destructive power of modern weapons, as well as the use of kamikaze suicide pilots. Was that a legacy to be proud of, or was it a pointless waste of life? At the end of the day, you didn't have to be Japanese to recognize that the show had many fine qualities and was order of magnitudes better than anything being produced in America at the time. Japan had some real problems to deal with, as she also worked to redefine herself in the post-war age. The United States could have been real jerks, but as Japan matured, America's influence there eventually waned. The examples of Rudolph and Star Blazer show how, despite the historical, cultural, and linguistic differences, Japan ended up so enriched that they began influencing American culture. Though it's been over half a century since the original stop-motion Christmas special aired, the cultural influence Japan has exercised on the United States has only grown and continues to grow to this day. By the late 1980s, the country's economy had become so robust that the image of the powerful Japanese corporation became a Hollywood stereotype. Some movies predicted a future where the Japanese ran America. Today, our relationship remains very strong. We are encouraging Japan to grow her military and take on a more active role as a partner in a region that is being threatened by Chinese hegemony. Japan's self-defense force, while not a military in name, actually ranks 8th overall in the world's militaries by global firepower. That puts it above countries like Italy, Germany, and even Israel. Has anything like this ever happened in the history of mankind? I'm not sure if there are any examples of one nation completely destroying another, and then instead of ruling it like tyrants or just taking all their stuff and exploiting her people, we become not just friends, but also completely culturally independent. And at the same time, we grew in friendship and rivalry simultaneously. In the American Revolution, we beat the crown, but that only sent the British packing. We didn't load up our ships and hop on over to London and start dictating terms. Sure, we forged a strong and long-lasting friendship with the Brits, but that's nothing compared to the post-war interaction we've had with Japan. The point I'm making here is that this is probably the crown jewel of achievements when it comes to the concept of regime change, and it is a wholly American and Japanese story of success. Right now, we have two major regimes undergoing monumental change thanks to either the direct or mostly indirect actions on the part of the United States. There are a lot of people, even on the right, who are intoning the threat of a quagmire. People who insist that regime change is just not possible, that it has never worked. There's no shortage of examples of failure, especially recently. Afghanistan stands out as one that still burns in our collective memory. But the fact of the matter is that while it was America who executed the best possible regime change in human history, only America is capable of pulling off a repeat performance today. Among these regime change skeptics, many are saying that these actions by Trump are some sort of betrayal of his campaign promises. But the fact is, Trump has never taken regime change off the table. It would be stupid to do so, as it is one of his greatest points of leverage. If there is anything you can predict about Trump, it's that he never gives away that which remains useful. As long ago as January 2020, the last year of Trump's first administration, the Cato Institute had this to say about Trump. Quote, and while President Trump has downgraded democracy promotion in his administration's foreign policy, discussions within the Trump administration regarding regime change have continued. Throughout Trump's time in office, members of his foreign policy team have considered targeting regimes in Venezuela, Iran, and North Korea, Even though the Trump administration has not taken armed action to remove these governments, the mere fact that officials within the administration have held high-level policy discussions on the topic shows that it remains a viable policy options. Options. That is what President Trump is all about, using whatever tools he has to affect any change he feels is needed. Donald Trump's real campaign promise is to avoid costly and never-ending conflicts that don't serve America's interests. It's annoying that his critics can't distinguish the difference between these two policy points, nor can they understand why one is desirable and the other isn't. By executing regime change in Venezuela, the president is keeping his promise to protect we Americans by removing not only a source of dangerous drugs, but also a major supporter of global Islamic terror. On top of that, he's made China pay a huge price for meddling in our hemisphere. Beijing had invested at least $62 billion in the country. That's money they'll never see again, and it serves them right for trying to enact their own regime change with one of our most important neighbor countries. I ask regime change skeptics, is the solution to this aggressive takeover of our neighbor countries by hostile communist power simply to sit back and hope for the best? Because that's been our policy for the past few decades. Keep in mind, China is still flooding the country with fentanyl from Canada. The best way to stop the fentanyl is to stop China. By taking Venezuelan and Iranian oil off the table, we've effectively cut China off from wholly 30% of its oil supply. In order to protect the country from drugs, terror, and the International Red-Green Alliance, we need to take China out of the picture. Ask any prior president how they would achieve this, and they would get only two answers. One, do nothing and hope the problem goes away. Two, open full-scale hostilities at the enormous cost of human life. President Trump found a third way. It also happens to be the best way, and because it's never been considered by any government functionary before, you know it's also the smartest way. Honestly, this is such an astounding accomplishment that I'm still reeling from the implications of what the president has been able to achieve in a few targeted moves. If you're not able to appreciate the scope and scale of what is being done by taking Maduro out of Venezuela, your opinion doesn't really matter. As far as the question of whether or not such a regime change is possible, I think it is. The aforementioned Cato Institute's piece says that the success in post-war Germany and Japan are owed to factors like modern economies, developed bureaucracies, and experience with democracy. These are definitely the case for both Iran and Venezuela, but I have to point out that the Cato Institute is approaching the question in the context of more recent attempts of regime change like Afghanistan, where modern liberal Western democracy was imposed on a country that had no experience with it. But that's not necessarily the case, that one has to impose something that is unfamiliar on a country where regime change takes place. By allowing those countries to decide for themselves what type of government they want, you remove that point of friction. Iran, for example, will likely move towards a constitutional monarchy, while Venezuela will likely transition to a more typical model for the free nations in the New World. These approaches echo the U.S. decision to allow the Japanese emperor to remain as the nation's monarch. In Venezuela's case, the country is both advanced in terms of economics and in terms of government, and it has experience with democracy. The nation used to be a thriving democracy at one point, and it held the fourth largest GDP in the world, which made it dwarf even the GDP of China at the time. It's not impossible for the nation to get back on its feet again, and it's clear from the scenes of jubilant Venezuelans celebrating Maduro's departure that a return to the status quo of better times is widely desired. With these impediments thus removed, there's no reason the U.S. can't do with Iran and Venezuela exactly what they did with Germany and Japan. Take a nation from defeat to independence and prosperity and friendship. I believe that another key aspect of prior regime change lies in America's restraint. Odd to say about a country that dropped 2 atomic bombs, I know. But the case of Japan demonstrates an almost surgical approach to getting the country back on its feet. Keep the emperor, get rid of the generals, then step back and watch Japan govern herself. The type of nation building we engaged in with Afghanistan was just too heavy-handed, and we imposed many concepts that were either alien or outright rejected by the people who lived there. Afghanistan didn't have buy-in, not the same buy-in that Japan had. That's because the key to getting that buy-in is letting the people know they're the architects of their future. This is exactly what's going on in Venezuela and Iran right now. That's a great sign that things are in good hands. Making friends with nations we were once hostile with is really a rare quality in a country, and it's an unsung American skill unique in the annals of human history. I think that for the people of America, Venezuela, and Iran, we can all rejoice in the fact that it's something no one has done better.